My name is Doug Pennington. My wife and I live in the Fort Lincoln neighborhood of Ward 5, Washington, D.C., of course. I'm a transplant to the district, resident since 2007. While my wife was born here, went to medical school here, and practices medicine here. Between 2006 and 2010, I worked for the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence, and am currently a communications professional working for a small nonprofit in DuPont Circle. As the Council considers enacting a gun carry ordinance that should comprehensively protect public safety while not running afoul of a constitutional right that is still largely undefined by the U.S. Supreme Court, I'd like to offer a couple of specific amendments to the bill under discussion today, as well as a few general principles that might guide your thinking on this issue today and into the future. I've submitted written testimony to the clerk that goes into depth on some of these points, but in the time I have here, let me discuss one principle and a couple of recommendations. What does the Heller decision mean in practical terms now? Is the country sentenced to unregulated gun use and ownership from now on? I think you all know the answer to that is no. While the gun lobby and its apologists will oppose regulation of any kind, the Supreme Court in Heller flatly rejected that approach. In fact, we should not forget what Attorney Alan Gura told Justice Ginsburg during the Heller argument in 2008, when she asked him whether a license to carry law would be okay under his view of the Second Amendment. Gura replied, "We don't have a problem with the concept of licensing, so long as that law is not arbitrary and capricious and instead has a reasonable and objective standards." He even gave examples of such standards, including knowledge of a state's use of force laws, some sort of vision test, demonstrated competency, and background checks, of course, his words. We should take him up on that. The principles that Gura laid out and the examples that he offered, as well as policies that he did not mention but are analogous, provide a very wide lane, I believe, in which the Council can regulate, including many unexplored opportunities to use the power of government to save lives at risk from gunfire. If the justices, in particular Justice Kennedy, should ever be presented with the unappealing prospect of rejecting sensible, objective regulations of gun behavior designed to protect the public safety that do not prohibit gun use by people who can show society that they are responsible, my sense is those regulations would carry the day. A couple of examples, and I think in the context of the discussion today, they might be relatively minor, but they're important to me. Think about a licensed gun carrier parked in their car at the shopping mall, where they shoot themselves while trying to adjust their weapon. Or imagine a licensee dropping their handgun in the grocery store, setting it off and firing a bullet into heaven knows what or who. These are not abstract concepts. These things happen. I think standard Google search will show they happen weekly. They're utterly routine across the country. Unfortunately, too often it is unclear whether such behavior results in the suspension of the shooter's gun carry license. I don't understand why that is. It makes no sense to me. I think the District of Columbia needs what I call a Barney Fife rule. On the Andy Griffith Show, recall that Deputy Fife would accidentally fire his weapon while still in the holster, and Sheriff Taylor would take his gun away for the safety of everyone involved. I suggest that after any accidental shooting by a licensee here in the district, an automatic 1-year suspension be imposed, plus an additional 16 hours of required training. Such a policy could be amended, I think, to Section 905 of the current bill, or perhaps to Section 22-4503.01 of the D.C. Code, which governs unlawful discharge of a firearm. To my knowledge, and I could be wrong, such a policy would be a first in the nation, but it would be a common sense regulation designed to protect the public based on the objective behavior of the licensee. A second recommendation points to the crime of stalking, specifically defined in D.C. Code Section 22-3133. I'd gladly be wrong about this, but after double checking, I can't find a specific explicit prohibition against stalkers convicted of violating that statute from obtaining a gun registration certificate or from obtaining a gun carry license in the bill under consideration today. Having said that, D.C. Code Section 22-404 and -407 also mention stalking or similar behavior and are referenced among the disqualifications for registering a gun in the home. It's possible that few, if any, stalkers are prosecuted under 22-3133. I haven't investigated. I don't know the facts about that. And if that's the case, this recommendation can be set aside. If that's not the case, however, the council, I would urge, should confirm whether this gap actually exists, and then fill it by perhaps amending the requirements for obtaining a gun registration certificate, or amend Section 902 of the current bill to prohibit anyone convicted of stalking of any kind from obtaining a license to carry a firearm. Like I said, there's much more in my written testimony, but this should suffice for current purposes. Thank you for your time, everybody, and for your work on this important issue.
And again, we have your full testimony,
yes, sir,
and we will work with it.
Thank you.
Next, thank you.
Mr. Pennington, you mentioned about stalking. My quick read of it is that if a person is convicted of stalking, they're ineligible to register a firearm. And under the scheme that we have for carrying, one has to not only be able to, but has to have registered a firearm in order to get a license to carry.
Correct.
As a prerequisite. So if stalking is, this is like a syllogism from high school.
No,
stalking
it is. It's a chain of reasoning. Yeah.
If stalking is a disqualification from registration, and registration is necessary for a license to carry, then stalking would prohibit, a conviction for stalking would prohibit or disable a person from being able to get a license to carry.
And so my amendment to that argument, which I completely agree with up to this point, I think the requirements that we're talking about are in 7-2502.03. That provision only specifically mentions two statutes, at least that I could find, 22-404 and -407, that one of them I think has just the word stalking in its title and its name. The guts of that statute, get around the practice of stalking, but DC Code has a statute that is pretty extensively defining stalking that is not included in the requirements or the disqualifications for getting a gun registration certificate, at least that I could find. And the stalking statute that I'm specifically talking about is 22-3133. Now, if it's there and I missed it, then I apologize for wasting people's time, but I don't think it's there, and to the extent that anybody is prosecuted under the latter statute, as far as I can tell, it's not covered in the gun registration certificate disqualifications. And if that's the case, then I go right back to your chain of reasoning. The thing is exactly right.
Okay.
But you get, anyway, you see my
yes,
point.
we will check that out.